I think, the government needs to be careful how they proceed. I mean, it's kind of careful what you ask for. My own personal opinion is I think they're moving a little fast. I understand the urgency of it. We have, the holes are growing in our atmosphere. I get that. But on the other hand, it has to be feasible. And we still have to get our work done. We still need to be able to, fix our streets, protect our citizens.
Hello, I'm Chris Brown, Fleet Group Editor at Bobbit, and welcome to the next episode of Fast Forward Interview Series. Fast Forward is about connecting with leaders in fleet, tech, and automotive to show what the future holds for fleets of all types. In this episode, I interview Kevin Miose, Fleet Manager for San Joaquin County in California. Kevin and I will discuss the challenges of electrifying a public sector fleet, particularly how San Joaquin is sourcing grant money to help stay in budget, and how the county plans to meet California's pending green mandates. But before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the Fleet Forward YouTube channel so you don't miss future episodes of Fast Forward. And hey, feel free to drop us a comment on the channel. Okay, let's get into it. Well, Kevin, thanks for joining us for this edition of Fast Forward.
Hey, glad to be here, Chris. Very exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's start with just tell us briefly about the San Joaquin fleet and your role.
Sure. Well, I'm the fleet manager here. So we're San Joaquin County. We're at the northern part of the San Joaquin Valley here, the namesake of the second dirtiest air in the nation. And so we have a mixed fleet, probably typical of most counties here in California. And we do law enforcement, sheriff patrol, district attorney, probation department. We have our general government. We supply cars in large pools to customers like our human services agency, that type of thing. And then the public works equipment fleet. There's another big chunk of fleet that we take care of. So that and each fleet has its own little challenges and customer needs that need to be fulfilled. And so we definitely try. We're big on customer service, so we try to keep people happy and make sure our products are generating satisfaction and getting the job done for the citizens here. And so mainly I oversee all the shops and responsible for the capital asset program, our replacement program. The day-to-day, of course, what's heavy on our minds right now is tons of regulations coming out of the state, coming out of CARB. We have Clean Cars 2 coming out. We have advanced clean truck, advanced clean fleet. Everything has its own rule to it, and and it's all designed to get us moving quickly over to the electrification.
So yeah, and I guess that kind of, if I can just jump in, Kevin, that kind of does lead me to my second question on sort of overall considerations when it comes to what the county wants and desires, and I guess it even goes broader that what the state's up to too. But let's talk about mandates for greener fleets and maybe contextualize staying in budget too.
Well, yeah, that's tough, Chris, because most of us fleet operators, and there's I work with in league with a bunch of fleet operators. We meet up quite a bit and we talk about these things, and, it's easy to stay on the status quo. We have our capital replacement, vehicles get replaced X amount of time, hours, miles, years, that type of thing. But this throws it off because, here we are, projecting inflation and technology upgrades, and we can, kind of program that into our replacement. But, when you're going electricity, man, the vehicles are much more expensive, 2 to 3 times more than a regular one. You need complete new fueling infrastructure for it. So it's a challenge. I'm used to, sure, I can buy a gas pump, but buying a whole charging station for 40 or 50 vehicles that are going to be on the road every day, it's a pretty big challenge. And as you know, Chris, there's a lot of difference between the time to fuel for an EV, the type of infrastructure you needed. A lot of EVs, since they take long to charge, so you need to usually have a what would be a hose per vehicle, with fuel. So there's a lot of challenge. Infrastructure, I look at the challenges, it's just as big as buying a vehicle. A lot of expense involved with that. And then just the pace of it, these regulations, by 2024, if products are available, 50% of our our spend on 3/4 ton trucks and up are supposed to be, pure electric. If there's
Wow. So I just want to stop you there. By 2024, those trucks are supposed to be zero emissions, I guess, right? Or
50% of our buy. So quite
Wow.
a challenge when you think about 3/4 ton truck on up to class 8. So pretty wide range of vehicles with a bunch of unique needs. As you know, as the vehicles get bigger, the more custom they are to the job that they're performing, the equipment that's on them. I look at this, the EV dump truck is a challenge. When you look at a dump truck now, just getting a dump truck with all the stuff on it you needed to do its job and stuff. Now we're going to add a battery or a hydrogen generator. Really complicates things. Then, the durability of working on a construction site, off-road in dirt on rough conditions, that type of thing. So I think it's a lot. And I mean, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of products out there, and there's a lot of emerging products, a lot of early adopter type products coming out right now. And counties and cities, we usually want something that's proven already that we're not taking a big risk. So it's a huge risk, Chris. So another what you're kind of talking about, how to stay in budget, right? So one thing I found is we've had early success. We've been trying to be an early adopter of EV. We bought our first Leaf in 2011 when it first came out, and we also bought that with grant money. We paid for about 2/3 of that vehicle with grant money. So it lessened the impact of the risk on making that purchase and stepping into it. As we go forward, I'm looking at grant money. I have that has to be part of my strategy to go out and buy this EV while it's still cutting edge and still early adopter. Because I think, as you see, as products become more, they become more commonplace and it becomes more ubiquitous, that these grant money and this infrastructure money is going to go away. So, I think, you got to strike now where the iron's hot and make some moves on that,
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, let me ask you about the grant money. I guess it kind of varies, right? But what portion of the premium for let's just say electrification specifically does grant money right now get you? Can you pay for that premium, or is it a third or a half or what?
Well, I'll tell you, Chris, it really varies by the product, right? So, let's pick an easy one. Let's pick a Bolt, right? We bought 10 Chevy Bolts. I was able to get for most of them. I couldn't get it for all of them. So you can only buy at the our district. You can buy 10 cars a year. So you're kind of limited. So we bought the cars over a couple of different years.
Okay.
But when we did, we were able to get 20,000 per car. And then we were able to go to Center for Sustainable Energy when they were handing out a rebate for another $4,500. So here's a car that we bought for $29,000 that we paid $24,500 for. So real easy way, easy sell to the board and our administrators because very low risk with the money, right? So, and then same thing with our infrastructure. The infrastructure that I've developed so far, I'd say we're probably 90 to 95% grant money that paid for the infrastructure we have now. We have I've got about 30 chargers or so that are level 2, 7.2 kilowatt, one you would call probably a reasonable charger these days. And pretty much, the charger part, I was able to get the air district to pay for all the charging. The only thing we're obligated to pay is the monitoring on that. So $400 a year. So pretty low when you consider what you're getting out of the deal.
What was that? I'm sorry, $400 a year, did you say? Or
it was like $200 a year per charging port.
Right. Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
And you're looking, so one project I didn't tell, we installed 20 chargers at our one of our main pools there. And I was able to combine Air District and SMUD. And SMUD was doing a fleet grant, which is exhausted now. And they offered to pay for everything from the grid to the charger. So they paid for the circuit box, circuit breaker box, all the wiring conduit, all the way to the charger, which is really helpful because that project, it was worth about $300K. And we got about $50K from the Air District and PG&E side of it. So they didn't really put up any money. They just paid to have the infrastructure installed, but they told us they estimated their side between $250 and $280. So for me to come up with that kind of money would be pretty substantial, just for one, charger station or just one facility. So yes, grant money's helping out with a lot like that. Like I said, but my concern is though we have to jump on that, now while grant money's still available because I think it's gonna get drawn down.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to get drawn down more on the sort of the infrastructure side or on the vehicle side?
I think you're going to see competition for both. Of course, manufacturers are going to keep pushing for subsidies and grants on that so they can move their product. Because, okay, for an example, we bought a Danar 4.0 power station, which is kind of a unique piece of equipment. You can use it as a mobile power station because it carries 250 kilowatts worth of energy on it. And it will take a hydraulic attachment. So you can put a backhoe arm on it. You can put a loader blade on it. You can do, a broom. There's, any kind of attachment that you can think of will bolt to this machine. So it's got a lot of versatility. But on the other hand, the machine's $300,000. So with grant money, we bought one for $187. So you can see there's significant help that comes with that, here's the manufacturer. It was on a core voucher, and the manufacturer actually did all the legwork for us. We just came up with our part of it, signed a bunch of documents for them, and we have our machine.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you something. How do you look at sort of the budgetary planning process? Let's say, I don't know, 5 years down the road, the sort of the infrastructure might be already in place at that point to an acceptable point, right? And then you're going to start to finally turn over the fleet with grant money that may be a little bit less. But because you have the infrastructure in place and because you're saving on sort of maintenance, maybe, and a little bit on electricity over gas, do you think you'll be fine there, or what's your projection?
Yeah, I think eventually when we make the conversion, and I think you're going to see prices coming down on things as, R&D gets paid for and they get a lot of units on the road, and then the cost per unit's going to go down. I mean, I could see that happening. It looks like, the entire industry is going to convert at some point in time. We're going to be, internal combustion is just going to be out the door. So, then that will be the new norm where, and I remember being at a seminar and somebody said, how long did it take to build all the gas stations in America, right? So
sure. Yeah.
So it just takes a while, but once it's in, it becomes ubiquitous and it's just everywhere. I would see costs going down. I think part of our plan here, when I look at just kind of the set of givens in front of us, just in our location, PG is our power provider. They certainly have their challenges, with fires and a lot of other things, but they also have a power problem, with reliable power here. A lot of times we have a lot of power setoffs. The grid in the summertime, the air conditioner load overloads it sometimes, and we get brownouts and that type of thing. So I think what I'm saying is, available electricity as a whole in our region is kind of low. So, and I think, if we're going to go plug in 200, 300, 4,000 million cars into this grid, there's not enough grid to handle it. So
yeah,
one of my solutions is I think we should, to be sustainable and have some, reliability, just to start developing our own. So
yeah,
I did get some grant money from CMAQ, not quite 900,000, but we're going to try to put in a 20-car off-grid solar charger at our hospital, which is desperate for some workplace charging. We've got a bunch of doctors driving to work in a Tesla. The site is out of power. PG&E's, they declined to do put in chargers for us there, even though we had demand for it. They just said it was just going to be too costly because where the next available power was over a quarter mile away from the site.
Wow. Okay. And we're just about out of time here. But I mean, these are some fairly big challenges. There's going to have to be grid upgrades, I think, to accommodate this. And finally, that 2024 mandate for commercial vehicles in classes other than passenger cars, it's just a big question mark. Any thoughts to kind of wrap us up on that point?
Well, I think, the government needs to be careful how they proceed. I mean, it's kind of careful what you ask for. My own personal opinion is I think they're moving a little fast. I understand the urgency of it. We have the holes are growing in our atmosphere. I get that. But on the other hand, it has to be feasible. And we still have to get our work done. We still need to be able to, fix our streets, protect our citizens. I heard some talk this morning at our MEMA meeting that the new Mach-E is great, but when you put it in pursuit mode and run it out, you're probably going to get about 10 miles out of it and on somebody else. So, not going to work for our sheriff's department, right? So that type of thing still has to be worked out, the actual real world, rubber meets the road type thing, Chris.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And hey, Kevin, I am really looking forward to having an expanded conversation at the Fleet Forward Conference, November 10th through 12th in San Jose. So looking forward to really getting more in depth about what you guys are doing in the county to green your fleet.
Definitely. And I think, just like anybody else, we've got kind of some mixed plans, but you got to work towards a goal, right? You got to start somewhere. So
Sure.
I'm going to be happy to share what we're doing and what's going on.
Great. Yeah, it's going to be a great conference. Okay. Well, Kevin, again, thanks for all this great information on another episode of Fast Forward.
Great. Thanks for having me, Chris.